If my boyfriend, not my, I've got one.
One day. I'm only joking.
Please.
Just a quick disclaimer, the content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, crime scenes and other disturbing material. Listener discretion is advised. This episode is sponsored by Think Forensic.
Think Forensic are a one-stop shop for all things forensic science and crime solving. They hold experience days, as well as corporate events, team building events, and general education for primary school right the way up to university level, as well as other events and consultancy. There's also a shop where you can get your hands on all things crime solving, from evidence gathering to packaging and collecting evidence, as well as other forensic science equipment.
For more information or to book on an experience day, please visit the website.
Hello and welcome back for today's episode, which is episode 8 of our Grave Secrets podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Beth.
And I'm Annie, and today we've got something new for you again. We're literally reeling out these new episodes, aren't we? So we are going to be discussing the evidence. It's a whole new sort of segment again, isn't it? And we're going to be picking little bits of evidence that we find interesting along the way and then doing a full episode on them so we can delve a bit deeper into like single pieces of evidence.
Yeah, so for example, for this one, we're going to be talking about eyewitness testimonies, but we're going to be discussing how they can be a positive thing, they can be really useful as evidence. But then equally, we are going to go through some of the restrictions, some of the limitations with it as evidence. We'll mention some stats, and we're also going to mention a couple of cases where eyewitness testimony has been crucial as a piece of evidence, and then discuss whether or not it was a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah, but first, actually, I've got something that you don't know about.
Oh, okay.
So we've got you something. Right, if you're listening on audio, we're going to be clanging on the microphone here. We've got you a gift.
Oh, that's exciting.
So, we'll have to describe it to the ones that aren't watching.
I'm
on
unboxing. It's
YouTube.
A live unboxing. This is very exciting.
So influencer Beth here with a little unboxing.
Oh, handle with care.
Don't forget to show it to the camera with your hand behind.
Oh, it's very me.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, just for context, it is leopard print, multicoloured. It's pink, purple, blue. It's incredible.
So Beth has now got her own cup. Ta-da. And I was tempted to give it at you earlier because you were like, I'm just going to go and get some water. And I was like, you can fill your cup up with water soon.
Nice.
So it's a huge one as well, because I feel like when we're filming, well, today we're having a short session, but normally we have quite long sessions. And it's easy to just forget to drink. So I feel like with these, it's a bit clashy with what you're wearing today.
But I like it.
You like clashing, don't you? It probably matches more with mine.
Who'd have thought it?
It's the perfect match, but
not you.
Mine. If you're watching on YouTube, this is mine. My plain black one.
Oh, but what an upgrade! Look at this.
From a glass of water to your snake print cup.
Get in. And I got lipstick on, so the straw's much better.
Yeah, well, they are nice straws as well. And they don't get hot, and they've got a piece of that stuff thing around the top. So when you're drinking your hot drinks, the straw doesn't get hot, and you can still drink out of a metal straw.
I'm going to be posting on my story later. Look at me, first influencer gift.
Tag the brand. Let's get some more said. Oh, sorry. So back to the episode. I've just distracted everyone. So today when we start talking about eyewitness testimony, I think what we're going to do is strip it right back to the sort of bare minimum to start with, because working in the forensic industry, I always think everyone knows everything. Everyone knows everything that I know. So I can start going off on a tangent sometimes and I think, oh yeah, that's just a given. And it's actually not.
Yeah. I think a really good example of this is we recently at Think Forensic held the Art of Faking It workshop, which looks at art fraud and effectively where a piece of art has come from. So the history of the art. But when that trail effectively of where it's come from, like who created it and then who it's been sold to, etc.
Right.
That is called the provenance of the art. So you're looking at art provenance.
Right.
But we'd got on one of the worksheets, like, basically, does this align with the provenance that you've been given? And someone was on the session. So we just assumed that they would know what provenance was.
Yeah.
But obviously, unless you're really into it,
Yeah,
you're probably
you've got to be really into it
so
to
they,
know.
So they were like, "Excuse me,
What does this mean?
Can we just check this?" And I was like, "Oh gosh, yeah, of course."
Yeah.
But yeah, like you say,
But
it's
then
just
I bet now you think, oh yeah, I'll word something more or tell them obviously what it means.
Just for context.
Yeah, this is what this is.
But we're not talking about art crime today.
No, if you want to talk about art crime, you can go on the Think Forensic. Go on the Think Forensic workshops and Beth will be there. If it's a weekend, Beth will be there. You know the drill. I'll be at home. So eyewitness testimony, in terms of the legal system, the eyewitness testimony is when someone has witnessed something that is believed to be a crime, and then they can give either an oral or a written statement to the police. This could be anyone from like bystanders to emergency services, it's such a wide range. You don't really think, the emergency services would be the eyewitnesses, but they're often the first on the scene and the first to see everything undisturbed.
Yeah.
So it obviously makes sense for
I'm
them.
going to say, because again, I think quite a few people, like you see on the telly, it's the people that have gone, "Oh my God, I've just seen him run away from the scene of a crime."
Yeah.
And then like, well, tell us what you saw.
Yeah.
Whereas it's not actually like that all the time, is it?
No.
And in some cases, it's not even eyewitness testimony necessarily for the suspect.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just to gain more information about what's gone on.
Yeah.
So it might actually be of the victim, what the victim was doing beforehand or the last time they were seen.
Yeah.
Rather than it being
at the
someone
actual
that's
scene of the
committing a
crime. Yeah. So it's sort of like getting people to build up a picture of the whole events that have happened, not just the crime itself, but right from before the crime all the way to
it's
after
the most
crime.
accurate depiction, isn't it?
Yeah, and these people could, these eyewitnesses could then sit down sometimes with a forensic artist, and they could put together like a EFIT or a CompuFit, and that's what you then see on Crime Watch, to give like a description of usually the suspect in that case.
Yeah.
And then obviously give their written statement. And, these are actually, people class these eyewitness testimonies as being a really reliable piece of evidence.
Yes.
So how reliable is actually an eyewitness testimony? Because we've got to think of everything that could...
All the factors,
yeah. And there are so many, aren't there? When I
are.
started reading into it and started looking at it for this episode, there was actually more things than what I thought in general.
I think there's some things that you think of naturally. So the one thing, again, when we are teaching in schools, I always do my favourite little fun activity, which is once I've been talking at them for about 10 minutes, I say, right, everyone's been looking at me and paying close attention. Who can tell me how many earrings I have in?
Yeah, no one ever gets it.
And no one ever gets it right.
They just throw it out, don't they? They go, 6,
I think
2, 3.
But the reason I do that is to show that even though you are paying attention to someone, you're not counting how many pairs of earrings they've got in.
Yeah.
Or what colour their eyes are necessarily. Unless you've fallen in love with them from the minute that you've seen them.
And you're looking at every little detail.
But quite often, you're not paying attention to things like that because you're just taking more of a holistic view of it.
Yeah.
Again, if it's a situation where you're out and about shopping, yes, you might have noticed someone's outfit or nice hair or whatever, but that's probably the only detail you've picked up on.
You didn't notice what eye colour they've got.
No, not at all.
Like, it wouldn't even cross your mind to look, would it? And think, I need to remember this person's eye colour.
So some details are more obvious.
Yeah.
And you know that you'll have a level of detail, but there's loads and loads of factors that you've got to consider.
Yeah, and memory, a lot of people think that your memory is like a video recorder and it records exactly what's going on and then it just plays it back. But it actually doesn't. It picks out certain points and then fills in the rest of the information in between.
Yes.
So even if you think that you've remembered something exactly the way that it was, you might not have.
Yeah. And I think another element of that is how familiar you are with the set of circumstances.
Yeah.
For example, if it is something that's taken place in your work or if it's on your way home from somewhere, a regular route, you do fill in those details.
Yeah.
Again, for example, at the crime scene centre, we've got an abandoned vehicle in the centre. I couldn't retain what colour it was because it's the same car as I used to have. So I've got a picture of it in my head, which is blue.
Right, because did you have the blue one?
So so I was thinking I could only picture a blue one, and then thinking, gosh, is it silver or is it?
It is silver, isn't it?
Yeah. But again, I wasn't sure, and you think that's something I should be sure about
because you see it all the time.
But because you see it all the time, you're not actually paying attention.
And we've got to think as well, if two of us, so me and you, saw the exact same events happening, and then we went away straight after it and started to write it down, we would write it down different in our own words what's happened, but we would also write details differently.
Yeah.
So even though we've seen the exact same thing, we've had the exact same time in between seeing the event and then writing it down, we might not see the same things technically.
Isn't it?
Yeah, our perception might be a lot different.
Yeah. So if we talk about what some of those differences are, for one, neither of us wear glasses, but our eyesight might differ.
Yep. Mine definitely differs.
Yeah.
Mine's not great.
I've got quite a good attention to detail in terms of I notice quite a lot about what's going on. So I would probably pick up on people, if there were people involved.
Yeah.
Like behaviours of people.
Yep.
Then we've got anxiousness. Like we've got... So you've got like the physical characteristics. So you've got things like...
So your personal
vision.
factors.
Yeah, so you've got things like vision or whether we wear glasses and things like that.
Or if we are under the influence of alcohol or drugs, because that can obviously distort your perception.
Yeah, equally if I'm having a particularly anxious day, I might have felt like someone was acting shifty or looking at us funny when they weren't at all. It was just...
Yeah, I feel though anxiety and stress could work either way because you could be that anxious that it might like haze your judgment.
Yeah.
But also, if you are an anxious person, you are probably going to take more notice of your surroundings.
Yeah.
So I'm not an anxious person at all. So when I go out, I probably just like a bit carefree and not really that bothered. Whereas other people who are a little bit more anxious would probably be looking, thinking...
Yes, checking.
Yeah, just checking things out, even just for like safety purposes.
Yeah.
Because I'm not like that, it just goes over my head and I'm just do what I'm doing.
Yeah. And then you've got things like, so a bit like that you mentioned, is recollection of things. So some people, and this is really fascinating, but then we go down the psychology route, the way that we process information differs. So some people don't actually get a picture in their brain. So if I said to you, chicken or red apple, I'm pretty sure that you will picture a red apple or a chicken.
Right.
Of some description.
Okay.
Do you go like a fried chicken? Do you go a real chicken? Do you go a slab of chicken?
An alive chicken.
An alive chicken.
Yeah.
Nice.
Like
that's
a little alive one, yeah. Running around.
But some people just have nothing. It's blank.
Okay.
They have the knowledge there. They know what it is.
Yeah.
But there's no visual.
Right.
So that then makes a difference.
Yeah.
Because it probably won't skew, like I said about the colour of the car. They won't have an image in their head.
Yeah.
So it won't skew that. But their recollection of something will be very different to someone else's.
Yeah.
That's another thing to consider. And then we've also got things like if someone is dyslexic and they've seen someone get on a bus or in a car, they might have read the number plate, but how accurate is it if they have something like dyslexia?
Or even mix the numbers up on things. Because I think a lot of the time we are not going to... The witnesses are not going to have stood there for a long amount of time and seen the details of things, a suspect. Like you said, it might be a bus going past.
Yeah.
It might be a number plate on a car, which is moving.
Yeah.
It might be a suspect, which has just ran past them. Mm-hmm. It's just that split second that they've got to look and taking all the evidence without knowing they need to take it in, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Equally, circumstance, which we've kind of touched upon, but if you're running around with 3 kids... Or if you're a dog walker that's under a lot of pressure to not lose any of them.
Like my 2 reactive dogs. Yeah. I don't look at anyone on a walk because I'm so embarrassed that I've got a 2 kilogram dog that thinks she's a German Shepherd. So she's either scooped up off the floor and I run away from the people or... So like I wouldn't really recognise a lot of people on a walk because I'm always just pulling my dog away from them. So things like that with distractions are probably like a big thing, aren't they?
Yeah, a big hindrance.
Yeah.
And then we've got the more, again, psychological side of things. So you've got things like unconscious bias.
Yep.
Which basically is when we're talking about maybe, again, it comes down to perception, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But if you're not familiar with a certain culture, or if you have a bias on
what you think a criminal would look like as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, you sort of perceive that person as the criminal in this situation.
Yeah. So again, you might think, oh, well, yeah, they were likely acting a bit dodgy.
Yeah.
When in actual fact...
So they must have been the suspects. Yeah.
When in actual fact, they weren't doing anything. Again, you could put that down to if you see someone in a hoodie and a face mask, you're more likely to think that they're going to be stealing from the local corner shop than the old lady who might just be shoving things in a little trolley as she walks around. Yeah. So you've got unconscious bias, and then you have also got people consciously misleading. So misleading information.
So I've got a bit of a case to talk about later on where a witness had intentionally misled the police, and that led to like a whole heap of events that we'll get into. But also we've got the environmental factors as well. So if it's poor lighting, what time of the day, how far away you are from the event that's taking place, how much time has passed, like in between you seeing it and then you're going to write it down.
Because again, you know, in certain situations you might have... for example, something happens at a party.
Yeah.
The police might get there and say, no one can leave, you all need to write a statement. Fair enough. That's pretty quick off the mark.
Yeah.
But in other cases, again, if you've been in a shopping centre and something's happened, the likelihood is they're going to have to then track you down, find where you were, and it might be a week, 2 weeks later that
someone comes knocking on your door saying...
to recount that information.
Yeah, what happened.
So yeah, that's very difficult. And back to the point of the unconscious bias, one thing that I thought about, which I found interesting in my own head, was, you know how I talked to you about when I was with the brain injury charity?
Yeah.
Don't know what was happening there. When I worked there, I said one of the biggest... not surprises, but kind of wake-up calls that I had was one of the guys had a really serious brain injury, but the way that it had affected him long-term is that he spoke with slurred speech.
Right.
And he staggered when he walked.
So you'd think he was under the influence at first glance, wouldn't you?
Yeah. So I realised at the time that if I'd have seen him walking down the street, I would have probably felt a bit unsafe, maybe crossed the road.
Yeah.
Because I would have thought that he was under the influence and could be a potential danger.
Yeah.
So that leads you to the fact that if you were to see him and write a witness statement,
you would describe him as being drunk.
Yeah.
Oh,
and it was completely
over.
inaccurate.
Yeah.
But that's just, again, natural perception, because you work on the information that you've been given.
Yeah.
And naturally, when people are under the influence, they have those two.
Yeah, they're the main things, aren't they?
Yeah. So they're the indicators. But again, that's why you've got to have the more scientific backing to actually verify the information that you've been given.
Yeah, there's actually something called the weapon focus effect as well that I was reading about. And if someone witnesses a crime where there is a weapon used, so say if someone pulls out a gun, the witnesses or the victims tend to focus on the weapon.
Okay.
Because you're looking at where that weapon is, danger. Where it's pointing, what the danger is, probably how you can get out of the situation, and they don't focus on looking at the suspect.
The face, yeah.
So that could be like a sort of a distraction away from the perpetrators.
Yeah.
Because quite rightly, you're going to focus on where the weapon is being pointed.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, you're not going to...
Yeah.
You're not
doesn't
going to think
really
about
matter
anything
what colour
else.
eyes they've got at that point, does it?
You're going to want to save your life and save the life of the other people around you. So, you know, it's...
Again, interestingly, I think eyewitness testimony from people that have been, I mean, awful serious cases, but where people have been abducted for long periods of time.
Yeah.
Quite often, obviously they've got that initial shock and fear, but once they have been in captivity for quite a while, they actually come to the realisation that the more information they can take on, the more likely it is that they will be able to capture the perpetrator.
Yeah.
And therefore they do pay attention to things like eye colour, any scars, any acne, the smell of the person.
Oh, that's just reminded me. It was a while ago now when I've watched it, and I think it was an American case, and a lady had been kidnapped, like you just said, and she was very forensically aware. I don't know if she just had a really high interest in true crime, but she'd watched loads of stuff on the TV and she thought, right, I know what I've got to do. And she left her hair in the boot of the car. She'd put fingerprints all over the inside of the boot.
Oh, right, okay.
In the bathroom, on the mirror.
Yeah.
She'd then put fingerprints on it. She'd done all sorts. And when she finally got out, she went to the police and she gave such an accurate, good statement. The police were sort of like, what?
Is she faking?
What the hell? How has she remembered all these things? And she was going, no, if you go into this bathroom in this place. And I think she'd been in the boot of a car and she'd remembered all the turns that they took, and that's how they got to the location.
Yeah.
And, my memory could never.
Yeah.
Could absolutely never do that. But she was absolutely incredible at just memory and remembering things. Can you remember what it was called? Have you seen it as well?
No, but I've heard of a couple of cases where that's happened. There was one where she'd managed to basically write a name with a penny that she'd found under one of the floorboards on one of the walls on the inside of a cupboard. And then I've heard about people putting fingerprints in bathrooms before.
Yeah.
But there's a case that we cover at Think Forensic, and she was kidnapped, but was actually released upon the police giving the ransom money. And when she was released, her testimony was incredible because she'd realised that if she kind of I can't speak today. Bad day for a podcast. If she kind of befriended her attacker, she would gain more information. So she was incredibly, impeccably detailed.
Because if you do befriend the attacker, I feel like their guard will then be let down. And if the guard's down around you, they're going to probably talk to you more, reveal more evidence.
Yeah.
They might
and
let
you've
you
got more
see
time
more of
to
them.
take it in, haven't
you? See more of them. You can look at, I always think now if I ever got kidnapped or if anything ever happened to me, I'd even down to things like the accent of the person, what the voice is like.
Yeah, I'm terrible at accents.
As well as eye colour, hair colour, and your genuine features.
Smell, I think, is a big one.
Smell is a very good one to know what someone would smell like. And even the place where you are, if you are in a house, it's going to smell different to if you are being kept in a workplace.
Yes, yeah. Because even cigarette smell, you could then identify what kind of cigarettes based on the scent, couldn't you?
And if you know there's the smell of cigarettes there, you know that I'm saying if it's someone that's kidnapped me, that they smoke. You could even look at the crime scene for obviously then the cigarette butts to then link back and get the DNA. So it's not just looking for these one piece of evidence. They just lead to so much more, don't they?
Yeah. But in terms of how reliable, so eyewitness testimony has obviously been used for years and years because it is the one thing that before any scientific discoveries and before any scientific evidence could be relied upon, it was people.
Yeah.
So if you had someone steal from a market stall back in the day, obviously you would ask the people around you.
Yeah.
And they'd probably be paraded in front of someone with the police officer holding the scruff of the neck and saying, was it this person?
I still think now that a lot of people do think that it's a really good piece of evidence, especially police, because you can put someone physically in front of a jury and they can talk about what's happened rather than someone who's a scientist who's gone in there and said, oh, this is DNA, and trying to explain DNA to people. It's you put in an actual person there who has been through it and can give you a full in detail description.
Yeah.
I feel like it comes across as a really good piece of evidence.
But that is a lot of pressure on a person in terms of getting them in front of people in court. But it was actually back in the 1970s that they first basically went to the police service almost and went to the courts of law and said, how reliable is eyewitness testimony? So it was right back in the 1970s, which I thought was quite surprising. But even then, they were saying, hang on a minute, there are all these factors to be considered. How reliable is this?
Yeah.
And they actually said that it shouldn't be relied on as a key form of evidence in a court case.
Yeah.
So yes, you can use it as supporting evidence, but it can't be
not
one of
the
your
main
key
piece of
pieces of
evidence.
evidence. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was never then added as a law. It was never made a specific law, but it became kind of a standard that you couldn't use it as your main piece of evidence.
Right. Yeah, that's quite interesting, because I suppose if it's not reliable, you just think of like the wrongful convictions, which I'm going to come on to a little bit about that next. And the wrongful convictions, if you've convicted someone and it's not the perpetrator, that perpetrator is still out there and he's free to carry on reoffending, which is obviously dangerous for everyone. And I did look actually at, there wasn't any data that had been done in the UK, but there was actually data from the USA. If I just get this up, because I screenshotted it because I found this really interesting. And it said that in a 2018 review of 365 wrongful conviction cases in the USA, where an individual was later exonerated by DNA evidence, 69% involved inaccurate witness identifications of the suspect.
Gosh, that's pretty high.
Yeah.
Well, very high.
Very high. So 69% inaccurate witness testimonies. Jeez. So they've said it was that person.
Yeah, and
it actually wasn't.
Yeah.
So do they still do like the lineup thing now? Do they do that in the UK? I've never gave evidence to that point where I've had to go into a lineup.
So yes, they do, but now it's quite often video footage rather than actual getting bodies in for a.
Because I've seen it where they have like photographs, and they'll show different photographs of different people.
Yeah.
But then to actually get all those people in, and then, you know, like they do on TV when they go behind a glass screen and then they look and they pick them out.
I've got a right interesting story, and I hope you won't mind me mentioning.
Go for it.
So I know a guy, and we were I don't know why we were talking about it. Obviously, it's me. But he said that at least 2 or 3 times, he's been in a police lineup. And I was like, what do you mean?
How'd you get in a police lineup? Like, did they ask you for it?
And he said he just got picked up off the street. And basically he said it was a few years ago now, but like a police officer basically came up to him and was like, look, you know, we need someone for this police lineup. And I think they paid him back then, but was like, you know, will you come and do as a police lineup?
Wouldn't you be worried though?
Right, so he said that he'd done it multiple times. And I was like, okay, but like what crime were you in the lineup for? Like, what if it was a super serious crime and then they picked you out?
Yeah.
And he was like, oh yeah, I didn't really think of that. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, because you might not even have an alibi for the time that the crime happened, because you don't even know what crime it is that you're there for.
So I don't think they do it like that anymore.
Yeah.
But apparently, just pick you off the street and say, would you mind being in this lineup?
Because I'm sure back in the day, my dad had witnessed, I think it was like a car crash or something. It wasn't anything too extreme.
Yeah.
And he had to go in, and I'm sure he had to pick someone out of a lineup. But I always think, where did these other people come from? And you've just said now, off the street.
Just off the street, yeah.
And did they make them look like similar?
No, so he said the only really information that he'd got was that they'd pretty much got the guy already. This was just like the final, like official, this
I'd
is
be
him.
terrified to do that.
I would.
Can you imagine?
But he was like, it's something different to do, isn't it?
But then as well, I suppose if you're paying people to do it, the people jump at the chance,
well,
yeah,
I guess. But no, it'd be too much of a risk. I'd be too paranoid that they would pick me.
Yeah, because you'd be so shifty.
Yeah. I'd be like looking just slightly to one side, and they'd go, oh no, I think.
But then again, you are quite a distinctive looking person.
Yes.
So I feel like if you did do a crime, you would make a rubbish criminal, because someone would be able to pick you out straight away.
Yeah.
Whereas,
unless they thought I was a man.
I'd throw that out there.
I could get away with it.
If you didn't have red lipstick on and they saw you from the back and you've got a hoodie on.
Mistaken identity. Yeah.
That's so funny. Yeah, whereas I just think if I did a crime and then someone went to the police and was like, oh, it's a small blonde girl. Well, I'm quite generic.
Yeah.
In general.
They might not not pick you out as closely.
Yeah. So wrongful convictions are actually really costly as well. So they can cost a fortune.
Yeah.
And miscarriages of justice is up to a £1 million payout of compensation.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that in the USA?
No, I don't think it is. I think it's in general because it was in pounds.
Oh, wow.
So 1 million, up to £1 million. I don't know how many people have got that.
Yeah.
I don't know how much people generally get if they've been...
Not that any amount of money would make it better, but I would want that.
Because when we were discussing Colin Stagg the other day...
Yeah.
So he got a payout, didn't he?
Yeah.
Oh, I can't remember how much that was. I actually looked at it for that episode as well.
I don't think it was that much.
It wasn't
was
a million, but it was still a substantial amount of money where he could have gone and bought a decent house nowadays outright.
Right, okay.
Can't remember exactly what the figure was. It wasn't a million, but it depends how long you've been in there for, doesn't it? Because he wasn't in there his whole life.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas if you're compensating for someone's life, you are going to be obviously getting higher. So do you want to go through your case first?
Yes. Before I do that, I just want to mention some psychological studies.
Okay.
So I was having a look, and there's been quite a few. As I say, the question as to how reliable this evidence is has gone way back to the 1970s.
Yeah.
But there have been some studies that have looked at how reliable facial recognition is from CCTV in comparison to those physical lineups.
Okay.
And they found that CCTV identification is just as prone to basically error, so wrongful identification, as your eyewitness testimonies.
Yeah,
looking at them.
I would think though on CCTV, I can never really pick up features unless it's like really good CCTV. I find it hard to pick out features, and even some of the colourings off, you might not be able to pick up skin colour.
Yeah.
A lot of them are in black and white.
Black and white, yeah. Even if they're not, they do. But they did 600 identity parades,
right?
And a fifth of people picked incorrectly.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
Yeah. And they're obviously trying to get it right.
Yeah.
So they're not even, we're not even going into the ones that are doing it inaccurately.
Yeah, I think there does need to be a lot more studies done around this, especially in the UK, because when I was looking, the most of it that I could find was in America, but I feel like that's because there are probably more of the wrongful conviction cases to choose from. Yeah. Because it's the Innocence Project that have actually been doing the research on it. So
interestingly, though, it's the UK that is said to be, or said to have, statistically the most CCTV cameras in the world, as far as we know.
What, like the best? Like the best quality or the most?
Yeah, just the most.
Really?
Which I found really surprising, because I'd have thought like China or a much
I
bigger
would have
country.
thought somewhere,
But it must be that where we use it effectively.
Yeah.
So the UK has the most CCTV footage. And a UK case study was Valentine and Dr. Josh Davis. And they found that 33%, I think it was, found in their study, 33% of people got the answer wrong, got the lineup wrong, but that was based on close-up CCTV footage. So they basically found that unless it's like a really close relative or a close friend,
you're not going to
recognise them from CCTV footage.
That's quite interesting.
But again, I think that makes sense because, like we've said, based on the quality of the CCTV and what you're actually paying attention to in a situation. Yeah, it's, the likelihood is that those nuances that you're looking for in the footage are not going to be what you've paid attention to.
But that's close up. So 33% is quite high. Yeah. And that's close up. So imagine further away is going to be less reliable, isn't it? So you can only imagine the percentage would go up the further away the CCTV is, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So what have we got? Oh, your case.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm sticking. I'm like, right, I'll do mine.
Just me for a little bit longer, please.
No, go on. Feel free.
So my case is a Scottish one.
Okay.
Nearly attempted to do an accent.
Oh, no,
then,
you
but I'm
didn't.
not going to.
I'm rubbish at accents, so I wouldn't have even noticed anyway.
I checked myself. So this is a case of basically a wrongful conviction due to eyewitness testimony.
Right.
And it was a case, it was called William Mills.
I don't think I've heard of this one.
No, I'd not until here. William Mills, and he was arrested for stealing from the Royal Bank of Scotland. I think it was like £2,500 or something along those lines.
Right. Is this recent or?
So he got arrested in 2007.
Okay.
So he was arrested in 2007, and one of the main pieces of evidence, or the main pieces of evidence that we used to convict him, were CCTV. And it was 2 police officers that had identified him in the CCTV footage.
Okay.
And then 2 customers from the bank.
Right.
So effectively, eyewitness testimony confirmed from 4 people. Yeah.
So there you'd think just that in itself, you think, right, 4 people have said the same
they
person.
Agree.
Like, they agree, that's it. And you'd like to think it's 4 independent statements, but this probably wasn't in that case if it was 2 police officers.
Yeah. No, one's probably said, oh, no, it's definitely him.
Yeah, I think that's him. Yeah.
So they had these 4 people agree from eyewitness testimony. He was then convicted. He received 9 years. And then about 6 months later, they did DNA testing, or they had done DNA testing on one of the doorstops that must have been at the scene. And the DNA didn't match him. It matched another offender that they then found was him. But by this point, he'd spent then about a year in prison. And at first, they didn't want to appeal his conviction, but then obviously did because they got enough evidence. And the DNA evidence was obviously...
That's a strong one, isn't it? If you've got the DNA evidence there, I think if you've not got a strong case, it's... it's a bit hit and miss, isn't it? But with the DNA there,
yeah. So he was released, but then had effectively lost a year of his life because he was wrongly convicted. But again, that goes to show that was 2007.
It's not actually that long ago.
No, and you've got 4 people there that all agreed.
Yeah, that's not long ago at all.
No.
It's actually quite scary, isn't it? That someone could just say, yeah, she did that or he did that.
Yeah.
And their word would sort of be taken as,
definitely. So whether or not, I couldn't find a photo of him because I was interested in how similar looking he was to the actual offender.
Yeah.
But I couldn't find it because that would have been interesting.
Yeah, it would.
To see whether or not those people had just seen a male of a similar age or whether they looked pretty identical.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I found that one interesting.
Yeah, that is. Do you know if you got any compensation for that?
It didn't say so, no. But again, I was reading like articles from the time, so we'd probably get it's unlikely that they get compensation until a lot further down the line, isn't it?
Yeah. So it probably wasn't even. It wouldn't have even been recorded, would it, at that time?
No, I don't think so.
Maybe if we Google it now, we might be able to find out in general how much. I'm just curious now, because it said up to £1 million. I thought that's really high. So just for a year in prison, I mean, like, that's obviously
and I wonder whether it would differ because it's in Scotland.
Yeah. Obviously, they're going to have different rules within the criminal justice system, aren't they?
Yeah.
So mine is a really popular one, and he is really one of my favourite people to watch on TV, this guy. So I want to talk to you about Raphael Rowe, who does the world's toughest prisons.
And if you'd like to come on the podcast, Raphael.
Oh, can you imagine? I was listening to the podcast today because I thought I really wanted to talk a little bit about this, but I was in 2 minds whether to say to you, could we do like an entire podcast on wrongful convictions?
Yeah.
And this is something that if we did do that, obviously I would go into a bit more detail on it.
Yeah.
So he was on the Diary of a CEO, and I just find him so interesting. So when he goes into the world's toughest prisons, honestly, it blows my mind.
Yeah.
Prisons over here are obviously bad and scary enough, and some of the ones he's been in, I just can't even...
I find it baffling how he kind of takes it at face value, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He is very honest. Like, he will say, like, this is horrendous and I'm really scared to spend a night here.
Yeah.
But equally, he does just kind of take it in his stride. But
He
then
just gets on with it, doesn't he?
Yeah, but then I guess with his history, which you'll...
So he's a British broadcast journalist and presenter who was actually wrongfully convicted of murder and aggravated robbery, I think it was, in 1998.
So again, not that long ago, really.
1988, sorry.
Oh,
so yeah,
it's
a bit further. Yeah. Around about the time I was born. And it was to do with the M25 robbery. So there was a lot of robberies happening at the time around the M25. And it was meant to be like a gang of 3 people that was doing
robberies
them.
Of what? Like
everything. There was like jewellery, high value items, cars, jewellery, a few other bits and bobs. And there was 3 people and they got the name the M25-3.
Right.
That's like the name the papers gave them or whatever. And he got convicted and he actually spent 12 years behind bars. So 12 years is actually... it's basically a lifetime, isn't it?
Yeah.
And when he was on the podcast, he was saying that he got something like life for the murder. There was another one, he got attempted murder. Then he got possession of a firearm. There was something else. And in the end, he'd got life plus 59 years.
Jeez.
So it was very, very serious offences.
Yeah.
And the way that the police dealt with it in general, he talks a lot about race and sort of like the racial profiling and racial bias.
Yeah, I was just
that
about
it
to
was
say,
in this, which is what we've just obviously touched on.
Yeah.
And just to spend that amount of time locked up for something that you categorically didn't do.
Yeah.
And when you look at the evidence, it's worrying that he was actually
convicted.
set up.
Yeah.
So his girlfriend at the time, Kate Williamson, she was living with him in, I think it was like flats or a hostel, but he had actually got a flatmate and he'd got his best friend staying as well. So I don't know if it's like within the hostel there was flats.
Yeah.
And she gave a statement to the police on the night that the murder and one of the robberies happened. And she said that he left at, I think it was 1 a.m. or 1:30 a.m. And he didn't come back until 6 a.m. And he was wearing different clothes and he was carrying a bag with some specific shoes in it or something like that. All the way through this, in all the statements, Raphael Rowe had said, I didn't leave the house that night.
Okay.
I was in bed with my girlfriend and we were actually having sex.
Oh, 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
May I interject?
Yeah.
If my boyfriend, not that I've got one.
One day. I'm only joking.
Please.
Oh, God.
Sorry. If my boyfriend came back really early in the morning.
Yeah.
I don't think I would be necessarily paying attention to what bag he had in his hand.
Or what time he came home.
Yeah, like time I can kind of understand because I do think like, again, if you'd gone to bed together and then he wakes you up and you think, oh, he's been out somewhere, I probably would look at my phone to see what time it was. But I don't think I'd really be paying attention. I'd probably be more annoyed and, you know, when you like try and go back to sleep, like close your eyes. I don't think I'd be looking at either what he was wearing or what bag he'd got in his hand. But
and
that's just me.
He'd not even gone out of the house.
Right, yeah.
So she'd gave that statement, and that, in fact, was a false statement.
The whole
statement
to the
police. That statement.
So he was categorically correct.
Yeah. So an eyewitness actually saw the car that was used to get to and from the crime scene that was also stolen.
Yeah.
Saw it, and in their statement, they'd said, categorically saw this car at this location at this time.
Right.
And at this point, it worked out that it didn't even fit in with the girlfriend's false statement timings. So they said that they saw it at 12:30, the car, which was near the crime scene where everything happened. Yeah. And the girlfriend said he didn't leave until 1:30 a.m.
Right, okay.
So at this point, his girlfriend,
anyway.
even the false statement, so that didn't even put him anywhere near the scene.
Okay.
So you've got that one that is conflicting in the first place, and it doesn't place him at the scene of the crime.
Yeah.
Then the other witnesses, which were the victims, they came forward and they gave descriptions of the offenders. So there's 3 offenders in this situation.
Yeah.
And the people that are arrested are Raphael Rowe, and I think there's another 3 of his friends at this point that are all arrested. And I know that one of them got released because there wasn't anything there. And the victims actually said that not all 3 of the men were black.
Right.
They were adamant that in the first original statements that they gave, that there was 1 black man and 2 white men.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
The people that got arrested, there was, Raphael said that his friend was, I'm sure he said African.
And for context, where's Raphael from?
You know what? I don't actually know. I want to say, I don't want to be, obviously, get this wrong. Maybe Jamaican?
Right, okay.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But like I said, not 100%. And it was just like the witnesses were saying...
Yeah,
There's 2 white men involved in this.
Yeah.
And they'd arrested 3 black men.
Right, okay. So from the office.
From the office, looking shady.
Yeah.
Not just one of the victims.
Yeah.
The person who got murdered, his boyfriend also said the same.
Right, okay.
But then the police said, well, how did you actually know this? Because they'd got balaclavas on. But obviously balaclavas, you can still see the eyes. And one had said that he'd got light eyes and light hair because they'd been able to see that.
Yeah. Yeah, you can still see skin tone.
Yes, skin tone and eyes. So I feel like the police then, once the victims had given the statement, had asked leading questions and, sort of made it fit their
agenda,
their narrative of what they wanted. And Raphael Rowe openly admits that he was into a life of crime. He wasn't the best.
He could have been a suspect if the right evidence had have been there.
He said he was doing like burglaries, like house burglaries and stuff, not this high profile things that were going on. So there was a registered police informant that came forward and he named the 3 people. So he named the 2 friends and Raphael Rowe, all as the M25 3.
Right.
If it's a police informant, are they actually reliable?
That's a whole nother episode.
That is a whole other episode. And on top of that, there was a cash reward.
Okay.
So the girlfriend and the informant were both eligible for the cash reward.
Okay.
For giving statements and implicating these 3 people specifically.
Yeah. And again, because like you say, it's quite high profile cases now. You've had a lot of burglaries.
You can't even say that.
Should have thought.
Burglaries.
Yeah. But now we're looking at murder.
It's escalated quite a lot.
Yeah. So they're keen to get them off the streets and they're keen to look like they have acted quickly and shut down this serious spree.
Oh yeah, because like the public as well, the general public, you can imagine the pressure from the public and the papers. And so Raphael got convicted along with the other 2, and he said while his time was in prison, he at first was angry, was mad at everyone. He spent a lot of time in solitary confinement, arguing and fighting with the guards, with everyone, like just hating everything.
Were his friends guilty?
No. And some of the people who were already in there, some of the people who had been in, the prisoners who had been in there a long time, had said to him, this is not the way to go. You need to, read up on your stuff. Like, you need to get yourself together.
Yeah.
And eventually he started studying in prison, studying like the justice system in general, just everything to help with his appeal.
Yeah. Because the thing is, even, in any situation, being bitter doesn't help you out, does it?
No.
Mentally, it takes more of a toll on you than it does anyone else. And so it's something negative. You don't want to be focusing on something negative in an already negative situation.
Yeah.
But then, like they've said, hang on a minute, you can actually use this time wisely to help yourself.
Yeah. So he put his appeal together, and his ex-girlfriend that did the statement against him actually wrote a letter to him while he was in prison and said, I'm sorry, but I was like coerced into it.
Wow.
So the police, it turns out, had, I don't know if they had something on her in general, but I know that she had like kids and, family. Yeah. And they'd obviously sort of said to her, if you do this, you can have the reward.
Yes. Or we won't look into you.
Yeah. And she'd actually took that opportunity and she wrote the letter saying sorry, which he then gave to his team, which then helped in the obviously the long run.
Yeah,
but he said he never asked her if she received any money from it.
Right.
He never knew how to bring it up with her and say, did you take the
what was it you
reward?
actually
So no one ever knows, and there's not anything anywhere that says who took the reward money. But in 2000 he got released.
Right.
So he does a lot now, working with charities and obviously people in prisons and in the same situation as him.
Yeah.
I'm guessing probably alongside something like the Innocence Project.
Definitely. Yeah.
To work with people. And he said not only does he work with the people who are saying they are innocent in prison, he also works with the people who are guilty and says, like, while you're in there, this is your time now to become a different person and break the cycle.
Yeah.
And the podcast is so good. It's really long. I think it was like an hour and a half or something, but it's something
it's
you can
like
just
hours.
Easy.
It's really long.
Really long. But it's something it was just such easy listening, because it goes back and it tells you about his childhood, his upbringing, his life of crime, the things that all led up to this point, and then everything that's happened after. And I find him such an interesting person in general.
Yeah.
So that his girlfriend's testimony played a huge role in his wrongful conviction.
Yeah, definitely.
Massive role in that.
And that goes to show as well that there are kind of different types of inaccurate witness statements.
Yeah.
There are all of the factors that we have considered in terms of accidentally giving a wrong or an inaccurate testimony, but then there are people that actually, for whatever reason, whether they've been coerced, whether it's for kind of financial gain, whether it's because they have a vendetta or a hatred for someone and that they are trying to get someone implicated for something that they haven't done. Eyewitness testimonies can go both ways in terms of intentional and accidental.
So I just had to Google where
he's from.
He was born, because I was like, I didn't want to get it. I didn't want to do any injustice. So he was actually born in southeast London, and his father was from Jamaica.
Right.
Came over at the age of 26. So I was right.
Yeah, I was just wondering, when you said about there was two white
racial
people.
profile. Yeah. And he had dreadlocks as well.
Right,
at the time. So definitely not fair hair and blue eyes.
No, not at all.
So I thought that was a really interesting one. I would like to do a little bit more digging and go into a bit more detail on that at some point, maybe in the future, if we look at...
Let us know if you are already a fan and if you'd like us to cover his case in more detail.
Yeah. So that's it for my case.
Yes.
And is that it for yours as well?
Yeah, I think so.
So what have we got coming up next week? We're going to do you every week now. We're going to tell you what we've got coming up the next week. So you know that you can tune in.
If we know, you're going to know.
If we remember. So what is it next week?
So next week, it's another case study.
Yes, I remember, yeah.
We are actually going across the pond, as they say. We mentioned in the last episode that we were super excited that we've got quite a lot of American listeners now, as well as international from other countries. But because we have quite a lot of American listeners, we had a look and we thought we would specify a case that's come from specifically from where people are listening. So Ohio, we seem to have a few listeners.
Yeah.
So we're actually looking at the Cowden family murders.
Okay.
So it is a multiple victim case, and we're going to be going through that in more detail.
Yep. So another case study for you all next week.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to that one, actually. Just something a bit different from somewhere else.
Yes. Yeah. And should we warn them now that it is an unsolved case?
Yeah.
So it's like the Patricia Hall case. There's a lot of information.
Yeah. And a lot of evidence.
But it is still an unsolved case.
Yep.
But it's super interesting. So hopefully
for
you'll
all
find
our
it.
US listeners. So we're going to wrap this up quickly because I can see the battery's about to go on the camera. And if it goes just before we say bye, I'll be gutted. So make sure you're following us on all the socials. Make sure you're downloading the episodes and we will see you next week. Bye.
Thanks. Take care.